Hi BookTube, and welcome to my Friday Reads video. As we're in non-fiction November, I've only got a couple of fiction books. I'm going to do all my non-fiction together in one video. Parakeet by Marie-Helene Bertino, American writer, and Dark Spring by Unica Zürn, a German writer, translated by Caroline Ruprecht. Both novels by women writers, both 5 stars, although in very different ways, which I'll come to. This is contemporary, released this year I think, and this was written in 1969. So I'm going to start with Parakeet, which a couple of weeks ago Matthew Sharappa announced was his novel of the year, even though he acknowledged there were still 6 weeks of the year left. He didn't see that it could be supplanted. So that intrigued me enough to order it. And when it started, yeah, absolutely, I could see how this was going to be a great read. It's the story of a bride-to-be who, a week before her wedding, takes up residence in the hotel where the function's going to be held after the church service. And obviously she has some bridal things to attend to, but also she works as a she sort of takes interviews with people who suffer brain damage, I think for insurance purposes. I can't remember the detail of that. That is her job, and she still has a couple of appointments even within this week. But the book starts when she is visited in her hotel room by a parakeet, which she quickly determines is her late grandmother has come back to visit her on the eve of the wedding. And one of the things the grandmother demands of her, she says, you've got to go and find look for your estranged brother, even though you won't find him. And then proceeds to shit all over the wedding dress. So that start, you think, oh, is this going to be a magical realism book? And I'm glad to relate it isn't. This is a book that tries to answer the question that the grandmother poses. Not only does she ask her to go and find her brother, she asks a question to the bride-to-be called, what is the internet? And that's never really directly addressed again in the book, and you think, well, what is that? And then you realise she's not asking what is the internet, she's asking what is the nature of connection. So the internet we know is connectivity, but it isn't really. This is a book about seeking connection, because the bride has a series of events with people to varying degrees, which are exploring the nature of connection, because at the heart of this is, does she really want to marry this bloke who's not really present in the book until the wedding itself. So, for example, I would say that her grandmother is one of the most precious people to her, as against her mother, who's very cold towards her. So there's a meeting with her mother, there's a meeting with her best friend, who has gradually over the years sort of drawn away from her as her life takes her down different routes to the bride-to-be. There's that appointment with one of her clients who has brain damage, who is married, has a family, but the nature of his brain injury has sort of severed him from all of that, because he has memory loss, short and long-term memory loss. So he's desperately trying to forge connection, but can't, because the various connections aren't there in his brain. She has to replace the bridal dress, which has been covered in bird guano. So she answers an ad where someone's offering a dress, and she goes to visit this woman to buy the dress. And halfway through, the woman's husband comes back from work. And the bride-to-be is absolutely certain that this is an ex-flame of hers, but he doesn't recognise her in the slightest. So he's sort of bemused and baffled by her reaction. And she's trying to provoke him into some sort of recognition. Again, a search for connection. Then there's the search for her brother. Now I can't go into that because it would entail a spoiler as to what the grandmother meant by you won't find him, but you have to go look for him. Now she's estranged from her brother because she was working in a cafe or a shop, and a mad guy came in and stabbed everyone in the cafe. And one of her friends who worked with her died, but she lived, but had to have lots of therapy and stuff to recover. And her brother wrote a play about it, which she felt immensely betrayed by, and that's why they were estranged. So these incidents are the sort of the thrust of the book, and the voice is very beguiling. It's slightly kooky, and in a way this book reminded me of The Wonder Boys by Michael Chabon, but I hated that book. And what I liked about this book is that the incidents are all towards a purpose. It's much more intellectually rigorous than Chabon's. To me, the Chabon book was, a series of absurd incidents like this to some extent, but done for laughs. There's no heart to them. It wasn't trying to sort of make any deeper points, or if it was, it failed miserably. This is much more intellectually rigorous. This is a search for what is the nature of connection, and should the bride go through with her marriage or not. So I really enjoyed this, but as well as it started, the voice didn't really change, the tone didn't really change until towards the very end, and I did slightly feel I was getting more of the same as I went through the book. So I do give it 5 stars, but equally it's one of those 5-star books I couldn't ever see myself rereading, because the moment I picked it up to reread, I'd remember the shtick, and I don't feel there's anything else there. Now, that's not a criticism. As I say, this is a 5-star read because it utterly swept me up in it. But it wouldn't be my book of the year, like it clearly is for Matthew, but definitely worthwhile reading. Not an author I've heard of before. And on to something completely different. 5 stars in a totally different way. So I came across the name of Unica Zürn through this book, which is non-fiction November reading. It's 100 Artists' Manifestos to the Futurist to the Stuckist, because Zürn was part of the Surrealist movement. She made art as well as did writing, and she sounded interesting from the brief profile in there. And unfortunately she committed suicide. She did have mental illness, and it's an 80-page novella. The first thing to say about it is, look at that. So that's the start of the book. If you see, it's page 35, which means there's 30 odd pages of introduction. And I started reading the introduction, then I stopped because it was quoting bits from the text, and I thought, well, it's only 80 pages long. I'm going to do this in an hour and a half. I'm going to remember, these bits that have been quoting the introduction, I'm going to remember, and they're going to be out of context in the introduction. So I stopped reading the introduction and I went back to that when I finished. And it's the story of a little girl, mainly between the age of 10 and 12, but it starts off with her birth, and at birth she looks at her father and she falls in love immediately with her father. But the problem is the father is always absent. It starts off because he's fighting in the war, and then it moves on to the fact that he's an international salesman, sort of trading in the German colonies. So he's never at home. And the mother is equally neglectful of the girl. So she has this huge thing of love that she experiences at birth, if you could credit that. But I think that's deliberate. This is a cradle to the grave novel. But she has to populate it with her own imaginings, her own fantasies, because the real people are not there to feel that sort of thing of love that she understands the dimensions of it and what it means, but she has to populate it herself. So, for example, she has all these sort of erotic figures, such as Captain Nemo from reading a book, and other figures that she stations in her mind around her bed every night because she's scared to go to bed. She thinks she's going to be strangled by a sort of the skeleton of a gorilla. It's a sort of monstrous, nightmarish figure. But she feels safe with all these sort of erotically charged men that she's created. There is actual sort of exploration of eroticism, which takes some very disturbing turns. And then she fixates on a guy at a swimming pool, an outdoor swimming pool. He's an adult, she's 12 years older, and there's lots of girls who are sort of fixated on this guy. And one day he's ill and can't go to the pool, and she finds this out, and she goes to visit him and buys some peaches to take to him. And because the nature of her love and her observation of him, her infatuation, is always, she has kept herself more distant, less obvious than some of the other more forward girls. He almost doesn't, he's surprised when she turns up. He's surprised when anyone turns up from the swimming pool, but this one in particular, because he's clocked her, but he's never, because she's always kept herself pressed back, she's never sort of been part of his conscience. And it's very, very awkward, a 12-year-old girl visiting, in a Maratha adult. He doesn't do anything inappropriate at all. But the reason she wanted to go and visit him is because, she fantasised that he's ill, he could die, I might never see him again, I have to go and see him for one last time. So she builds up this fantasy about this guy who's barely even conscious of her. And once she's met him and talked to him and given him the peaches, and they've had, she's got some sort of things that she's able to turn into sort of love tokens. She thinks, that's it, I don't have to see him anymore, that it's kind of complete and therefore over, and goes to its terrible denouement as a novel. Terrible, I mean by horrific, not badly written. The language is it's not difficult language, but it's powerful. It's, very short sentences. On the one hand, it's quite childlike in its rhythm, but the concepts and the discoveries that she makes, and the imagination she makes to fill this chasm of love, are quite beautifully rendered. Most books with, you get character revealed to you in drip feed fashion, and you gradually build up a picture of that character. Not this. This starts right inside her mind. The first thing, she's born, she feels love for her father. Then we get the absence of the father and the neglect of the mother. So you're always right inside her head. There's no slow drip feed reveal here. It's all out on show, which works really powerfully, I think. And there's one moment where she's disappointed in her mother, because her mother is sort of fat and, to her mind, ugly. And she goes into her mum's room for a hug and then wants to lay down next to her. And her mum sort of pushes her away. And what she wanted to do is she wanted to re-enter the womb, partly in that sort of Freudian sense of we all want to return to the womb. But also there's a sense here of when you go and visit an old house you used to live in, you can't go in because there's new people living there, but you'll still want to see it. And there's an element of, I used to live in my mother's womb. My mother is fat and ugly and horrible. I can't quite conceive of the house of her that I used to live in. That's the type of brilliant imaginings in this book. I was absolutely blown away by it. So much so that I've gone out and straight away ordered another book of hers called The Trumpets of Jericho. It sounds even more sort of gut-wrenching than this one. So this is superb. I mean, I really enjoyed this. 5 stars. I have to decide whether it's going to creep into my top 10 reads of the year. I think the only thing against it, really, is that it's so short. Not that you probably could have extended it any greater length, but small and perfectly formed, let's say that. So there you have it. That's my Friday reads. I'm mainly reading for non-fiction November. To finish, I've got about 100 pages of the 100 Artist Manifestos to finish. I've got 200 pages of Nothing by Bake Butler on the subject of insomnia to finish in a buddy read with Tina. Ironically, this is on the prompt for time, and Tina and I are both taking our own sweet time on getting through it because it's quite dense. Also, we are both insomniacs, and sometimes after a bad night's sleep you don't really feel like picking up a book about insomnia. It's tricky. And what I don't know is if I'm going to be able to get to my 4th prompt in non-fiction November, which is discovery. The intention is Friedrich Nietzsche, thus spoke Zarathustra. I don't know if I'm going to get to this because Nietzsche's tough. I can't, I've still got to finish this and the other one. If I do get to read it, it will be a buddy read with Lukács, Totally Pretentious, because he's read it before and loves it. So I've asked for his guidance whether he thinks that I and he together could do this in 5 days, Monday through to Friday next week, given that it's a working week for me. So I don't know if I'm going to get to that. And then I'm very much looking forward in December, the start of December, my first ever buddy read with Sean the Book Maniac. We've got a book by David Keenan. Can't remember exactly what it's called. We have established our Voxer communication, and it's in Scottish vernacular, I think, which might make it quite a challenge, although Sean has just finished a book in Scottish vernacular, so he has the advantage of me over on that. So busy November, you know, with these non-fiction November books to read, then a buddy read in December, and trying to finish off books I've started but not finished before the end of the year. So yeah, full on really. Okay, till next time, thanks very much.